Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere unexpected. You're not standing at the base of the Egyptian pyramids or strolling through the ruins of a Mayan temple. Nope, you're smack dab in southern Illinois. The air is thick with moisture. Crickets chirp lazily in the warm darkness. You're standing in a flat field that looks pretty average until you notice the massive looming earth mound in the distance. It rises like a green, grassy pyramid. Quiet, monolithic, ancient, and bigger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Welcome to Cahokia, the forgotten city that had bigger pyramids than Egypt. Now before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps me keep whispering history into your ears while you drift off. And if you're listening right now, I'd love to know where you are in the world and what time it is. Drop a comment with your city and your local time. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the grass under your feet, soft and slightly damp. The night air smells earthy like cornfields after rain. There's a silence here, an almost spiritual hush that doesn't match the roar of what this place once was. Cahokia, a city once alive with 20,000 voices, drum beats, dancing, sweat rituals, smoke feasts, and death. But tonight, it's just you and the ghosts, and a really big hill that isn't a hill. This mound, it's Monk's Mound. And despite the chill that just ran up your spine, it didn't get its name from ancient monks. That label was slapped on by French settlers who had no idea what they were sitting on. Before them, nobody knows what the original people called it. They left no writing, just the earth. Lots of earth. You start walking, and the slope of the mound rises before you. It's a layered ziggurat of packed dirt clay, and limestone bigger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. You pause because you probably weren't expecting an American pyramid to beat the Egyptian one in size. But that's what makes this journey so quietly rebellious. Cahokia messes with what you were taught. Historians still argue whether Monk's Mound was a temple platform, a political headquarters, or the residence of someone worshipped like a god. What they do know is that it wasn't built overnight. Dirt was dug up with stone hoes and woven baskets, millions of baskets. Some researchers estimate the volume at over 22 million cubic feet. Imagine hauling dirt for your day job. Then imagine your job is 300 years long. Oh, and here's a fun fringe detail. Some theories suggest Monk's Mound aligned with celestial events like the stars over Orion's belt, or the solstices. Was this America's answer to Stonehenge? Maybe? Maybe not. But if you squint, the skyline of Cahokia starts to look a little engineered. As you reach the top of the mound, a steady breeze cuts through the humidity. You're nearly 100 feet up. Trees and grass have tried to reclaim this platform, but the flat summit tells you someone wanted this view. Someone stood right here and looked down on thousands of people. At night, this place might have glowed with firelight. Imagine torches flickering along the wooden palisade that surrounded the sacred precinct. Hear the soft chant of voices below. Feel the eyes of the city turning toward this high place. You stand where ancient feet stood. Maybe those feet wore moccasins. Maybe they were bare. Maybe they were soaked in ceremonial paint or something more unsettling. Let's face it, you probably wouldn't survive a week in Cahokia between the seasonal floods, the absolute lack of plumbing, and the very real possibility of being sacrificed for the good of the crop yield. It's safe to say your yoga mat and air fryer wouldn't be much help. But tonight, You're just visiting. No basket hauling. No bloodletting. Just a quiet drift through time. Below you, Cahokia's memory stretches outward. Over 100 earthen mounds, many now flattened by farming rise in careful formations. Some are square-based pyramids. Others are conical burial mounds. They weren't random. The whole city seems to have been mapped with geometric precision, though historians still debate just how intentional that planning was. Were they mathematicians? Artists? Copycats of even older civilizations? One idea floating around the more speculative edges of archaeology claims Cahokia was inspired by Mesoamerican cities, that cultural memes floated up the Mississippi River like pollen on the breeze. Others say, nope. It was an indigenous innovation born right here on this land, by people who saw the world in earth and sky, not in stone and scrolls. And you lucky traveler get to soak in the mystery without having to explain it. The wind is stronger up here. It whistles past your ears like a forgotten language. You lie down on the summit. Don't worry, nobody's watching, and let the weight of the mound hold you. You're lying on a pyramid older than most cities in America, built by people who left no alphabet, no marble statues, no heroic epics. Just dirt, carefully placed, lovingly arranged, deeply meaningful dirt. And somehow that's enough. You're still lying on top of Monk's Mound, and the sky is a velvet sheet above you scattered with stars. The breeze has died down to a whisper, and there's something about this quiet that feels thick, like time itself is pressing in. You sit up slowly and look out across the darkened landscape. There's more out there. More mounds, more questions, more forgotten marvels. As you rise and begin to descend the mound's side, your steps are soft. The soil is compacted but forgiving. You reach the bottom and find yourself facing the vast plaza, an open area once teeming with life. Think sports arena meets spiritual hub meets gossip circle. Children running, vendors shouting, ceremonies unfolding. You imagine the smell of roasted cornwood smoke, maybe even fresh fish hauled from the nearby river. Cahokia was a city, and like any city, it had a rhythm, a heartbeat. You wander through the dark, sensing rather than seeing the outlines of other mounds. One to your left is low and circular. That's a burial mound. Another, further down, is shaped like a bird in flight, seriously. A full bird effigy made from earth. Archaeologists found it, and went, well, that's artistic. And then there's the scale. Cahokia wasn't a sleepy little village. At its peak, around the year 1100 CE, it may have had over 20,000 residents. That's as many as medieval London. Let that sink in for a second. Right here, in what is now suburban Illinois, was a city just as populated as the great European capitals. But while London had stone buildings and rats with attitude, Cahokia was built in dirtwood and spirit. You feel it under your feet. The ground itself holds the city's bones. You move through what was once a grid. Yes, an actual grid of streets. Archaeologists have found post holes that hint at housing rows, longhouses arranged in neat formations, and fences, big wooden ones, palisades that circle the central district like a defensive hug. Historians still argue whether this was to keep enemies out or to keep people in. Either way, it's unsettling. The houses were made from wooden posts, woven mats, and clay daub. No marble, no steel, just ingenuity. The walls may have leaked in rainstorms. Mosquitoes definitely weren't invited, but always showed up anyway. Still, these homes were lived in, decorated, cleaned, abandoned, rebuilt. A city is never just its buildings. It's the people inside them. So who were they? That's where it gets fuzzy. Cahokia wasn't a single tribe. It wasn't the Cherokee, the Iroquois, or the Sioux. It predates many of those identities. Some think it was a melting pot, a cosmopolitan center, where many groups mingled, traded, intermarried, and possibly got into arguments over corn storage. It's one of those things archaeologists phrase carefully. The cultural composition of Cahokia remains under investigation, which is academic speak for we're guessing. And you keep walking. You pass the remnants of garden beds. Yes, they've found soil disruptions that suggest deliberate farming zones. Corn, of course, but also squash beans and sunflowers. These people weren't just surviving. They were thriving, eating well, trading better, living large. But of course, no city gets to 20,000 people without a plan. Somewhere beneath your feet are layers of trash pits, storage cellars, ritual objects, and human remains. Cahokia grew fast, too fast. It may have doubled or tripled its population in a few decades. That kind of boom only happens when something huge is driving people in. A prophecy, a new cult, a regional alliance. Nobody knows. But people came. And they didn't just show up with their belongings. They brought ideas. Building styles shifted. Burial practices changed. Trade goods appeared from the Gulf Coast, the Great Lakes, even the Rocky Mountains. You're standing in the Chicago of the 12th century, minus the deep dish pizza. Let's not forget the sewers, or lack thereof. This city had no plumbing. Waste management was more dig a pit and pray for rain. Historians have actually found evidence that sanitation problems may have played a role in Cahokia's eventual collapse. Seriously, they call it the poop problem. It's both hilarious and tragic. Fringe theorists even claim Cahokia was an early environmental cautionary tale. Too many people, too much waste, not enough forests left to chop down. You chuckle, then cringe, because that sounds suspiciously familiar. But for now, in this moment, Cahokia is still alive. You can almost hear the drums. You pass the footprint of a house, just indentations in the soil now, and you imagine a child running through its doorway. Maybe they're carrying a carved wooden toy. Maybe they're running from a chore. Either way, their laughter is gone, but the earth remembers. You come to a rise that once held another mound. It's mostly leveled, now flattened by farming in the 1800s. A farmer probably plowed right over it, muttering about rocky soil, never realizing he'd just erased a monument. You sigh. Cahokia's not just a story of what was built, it's a story of what was lost. The stars above are still. You pause again. Cahokia wasn't alone. All up and down the Mississippi Valley, smaller mound-building cultures existed. They traded with Cahokia, imitated it, maybe feared it, maybe envied it, maybe tried to outdo it. Historians still argue whether Cahokia was an empire or just a very successful theocracy. Was there a ruling dynasty? A high priesthood rotating leadership by elder councils? There's no writing to confirm anything, just bones and beads and guesswork. But you don't need scrolls. You have the earth. And tonight, the city is yours. You drift a little further now, your steps following an invisible path through the dark grass. And it's not long before you find yourself standing on the ghostly outline of Cahokia's ancient central plaza. This was the heart of it all, an open field larger than 30 football fields. That's not an exaggeration. It was vast, flat, and meticulously cleared. You imagine the echo of footsteps, ceremonial parades, dancers twirling with feathered headdresses, and games that might have combined sport, war prep, and flirtation, all in one sweaty event. Tonight, though, It's just you. And the quiet. You keep walking toward what once were neighborhoods. Cahokia wasn't just some sacred site where priests droned and peasants bowed. This was a city people lived here full time. They weren't just praying on mounds or lighting bonfires for the gods. They were planting beans, scraping hides, losing teeth, and probably gossiping about who botched the latest fish smoking batch. We know this because of the trash. Layers of garbage are still buried beneath the surface. Broken tools, shattered pots, burnt corn cobs, and animal bones. All of it tells a story the city was crowded, messy, noisy, and alive. And it wasn't small. At its peak around the 1100s, Cahokia's population may have reached 20,000. Some estimates go higher, 25,000 or more. That would have made it the largest city in what's now the United States, until Philadelphia surpassed it 6 centuries later. Yeah, let that roll around your brain for a minute. Cahokia outpaced Boston, New York, and even all the colonial settlements before they were cool. You pass what was once a row of homes, long, narrow structures made of poles and mud. Families lived here side by side. Archaeologists have found cooking hearths, grinding stones, storage pits. There's evidence of babies being born, and elders dying in these spaces. It's domestic, familiar, even cozy until you remember that there was no heating, no screens on the windows, and about 14 million mosquitoes per square foot in the summer. And still, they stayed. Why? It wasn't just because the crops were good, though they were. The land around Cahokia was fertile. The Mississippi River spilled its silt onto the floodplain, like a generous if slightly soggy god. Corn grew tall here. Beans twisted up stalks, squash fattened in the fields. It was a garden that practically fed itself. But food alone doesn't explain this level of population density. Something drew people here. Something big and fast. See, Cahokia wasn't always a metropolis. Just a few hundred years before its peak, it was nothing more than a village. A few houses, maybe a communal structure, some scattered gardens. Then suddenly, boom, massive expansion. New neighborhoods, larger mounds, a central plaza, giant timber monuments. The kind of urban explosion that leaves modern archaeologists blinking. Historians still argue whether this was triggered by a new religion, a charismatic ruler, or a crisis that forced neighboring groups to consolidate. The truth is, we don't know. It's like someone turned a dial up to 11, and the city just happened. You look up. The sky is still dark stars, sharp and scattered, and it hits you again all of this unfolded, while Europe was doing the whole crusades and castles thing, while English monks were illuminating manuscripts, and Viking longboats were terrorizing the coast. Cahokia was building pyramids from dirt, and aligning timber monuments with the sun. Which brings us to a fun detour. How did they build so fast? Well, for one, Cahokia was a labor economy. This wasn't about money. It was about manpower. People hauled dirt by hand. No wheels, no pulleys, just woven baskets, aching backs, and an incredible amount of teamwork. Some mounds required millions of trips from dig site to build site. Others were topped with structures, temples' elite homes or platforms that probably held ceremonial performances or religious rites. Fringe theorists like to wave their hands here and shout aliens. But honestly, that's just rude. The Cahokians built this with human muscle and coordination. No UFOs required. The real mystery isn't how it's why they went all in on a megacity, in a place where summer swamps and winter chills take turns being mildly aggressive. As you wander through what's now a quiet, grassy field, you notice how the earth gently rises and falls. Some of these shapes are natural, sure, but others carefully crafted. Burial mounds, residential platforms, ritual altars. Cahokia was shaped, smoothed, layered, and reshaped. Nothing here is accidental. And it wasn't all unity and drum circles. There's evidence of tension. Some areas were walled off. Stockades of tall logs sharpened at the tops surrounded sacred zones. Defensive, probably, but also symbolic. Not everyone got access to the central mounds. There were haves and have-nots. Archaeologists call this social stratification. You might call it early HOA drama. One quirky detail that stands out some neighborhoods had communal kitchens, massive cooking pits, where food was prepared in large quantities. Feasts, celebrations, or citywide casseroles because someone caught a buffalo. It's unclear, but it's one of those charming details that reminds you these weren't faceless ancients. They were people, with birthdays, with arguments, with stomachs. As you keep walking, you pass a patch of wildflowers growing where a structure once stood, and you wonder, was this a home, a meeting lodge, a storage barn, a romantic rendezvous point for teens escaping parental supervision? You'll never know. But that's the magic of Cahokia. Every patch of dirt holds a story. Every mound is a whisper. And even though its people are gone, the echoes of their city still hum beneath your feet. You keep your pace slow, now crossing the grassy expanse of Cahokia's ancient core. The ground is surprisingly even here, smoother than you'd expect from centuries of neglect. Then you spot them timber stumps in a large circular pattern. They're replicas, but they mark something real. You've arrived at Cahokia's woodhenge. No, seriously, that's what archaeologists call it. Woodhenge, like Stonehenge, but made of cedar poles instead of enormous slabs of rock. And instead of sheep fields and druids, you get marshland cornfields and Midwestern humidity. You pause at the edge of the circle and gaze at the rising sun's imaginary spot. You're standing inside a prehistoric solar calendar. These wooden posts, reconstructed now based on post-hole evidence, were once arranged in perfect circles. The Cahokians placed them with mathematical precision to mark solstices and equinoxes. As the sun rose, its rays would pierce between certain poles, lining up with Monk's Mound or other important landmarks. It was a calendar, a clock, and maybe even a stage. Historians still argue whether it was used for ritual astronomy, agricultural timing, or some religious interpretation of celestial order. Maybe all of the above. Or maybe it was Cahokia's version of a morning talk show. Welcome back to Sunrise Over the Mound. Today we sacrifice a squash. Jokes aside, it's stunning. These people tracked the heavens without telescopes. They watched shadows crawl across the earth and designed their sacred sites to mirror the sky. That takes patience, precision, and a worldview where time wasn't counted with wristwatches, but felt through seasons, sunlight, and soil. You walk between the posts, half expecting to feel a hum, some forgotten frequency, tuned into a cosmic wavelength. It's quiet, but not empty. You can imagine priests or sky watchers here, eyes narrowed against the light, nodding as the sun aligned just right. That moment probably meant everything. The signal to plant to harvest, or to call the community together. Cahokia wasn't just physically enormous, it was cosmically structured. The whole layout seems guided by the sun, the stars, and the gods, if you believe in that sort of thing. And even if you don't, there's no denying the symmetry. The plazas, mounds, and wood henges all tie together like chords in a quiet symphony. The sky overhead is still dark in your imagination, dotted with stars that never quite hold still. You think of ancient astronomers staring at constellations. maybe giving them names that are long forgotten. Not Orion, not Ursa Major, something else. A turtle, perhaps, or a thunderbird. Stories passed in smoke and firelight, and just like that you're standing at the intersection of myth and math. Now here's a fringe tidbit that sounds made up, but isn't. Some scholars believe the Cahokians may have used colored dirt in some of their constructions. Different layers of clay, red, gray, and brown, stacked deliberately to symbolize different realms, the underworld, the earthly, and the celestial. It's like layering cake, but for cosmic significance. That means even the mounds themselves might have been symbolic calendars, or models of the universe. You brush your hand against one of the replica posts. It's been sanded smooth, but it stirs something. A sense of urgency, maybe, like whatever ritual they performed here had to be exact. No room for error when you're timing the year's first planting or calling for rain. Imagine this scene hundreds gathered in the pre-dawn hush, the air thick with anticipation, and the smell of burning sage or cedar. A silence that feels heavy, ceremonial. And then the sun peaks over the horizon, slicing between two wooden poles. A collective gasp. The new season has begun. Today, of course, it's all quiet. No priests, no processions, just interpretive signs and the occasional field trip of middle schoolers who are more interested in their phones than in the engineering miracle under their feet. But not you. You're here. You're paying attention. You're letting the dirt talk. And the dirt whispers that Cahokia's people weren't just farmers and builders. They were thinkers, observers, philosophers of the soil and sky, people who understood how to anchor time itself, using nothing but wood math and maybe a little bit of drama. Historians still debate just how advanced Cahokia's cosmology was. Were they simply watching for seasonal changes, or did they build an entire worldview around celestial mechanics? Some point to Mesoamerican influence, suggesting that knowledge trickled north from the Aztec or Olmec worlds. Others insist it was homegrown genius. Either way it worked. You step out of the circle and look back. The posts are plain, ordinary even, but now you know better. You've walked through time through science disguised as spirituality. The sky has shifted slightly. Imagined dawn, bleeding into imagined morning. You take one last breath and let it out slow. This city measured time in light and shadow, and you've just passed through its clock. You keep moving. The posts of Woodhenge fade behind you, and your path curves gently back toward Monk's Mound. Even in the dark, you can feel its looming shape watching you, massive, quiet, and perfectly still. But this time, you don't climb. Not yet. Instead, you trace the slope of its base and walk around it slow and steady, like you're orbiting a sleeping god. At its peak, this mound towered over the city, not just physically, but spiritually and politically. You're standing in the shadow of power. Whoever lived up there on that flat summit had control over thousands of lives. Food, faith, war, marriage, festivals, sacrifice. All of it flowed down from the top. This wasn't just a ceremonial spot. It was the high seat of Cahokia's elite. Possibly a god-king. Possibly a priest. Possibly both. Historians still argue whether Cahokia had a single ruling monarch or a rotating priesthood, but the evidence suggests at least one very important figure lived up there, maybe more than one across generations. Archaeological digs have found evidence of large structures, longhouses or temples that once stood on the summit. Wood thatch and clay, no stone palaces. But symbolic height meant more than opulence. You picture a figure standing at the edge of the summit at dawn, wrapped in furs, their silhouette lit orange by the sunrise. Below, thousands gather in the plaza. A gesture from the mound, and a feast begins, or a ceremony, or something far darker. Let's not sugarcoat it. Cahokia had layers: beauty, innovation, trade culture, but also sacrifice, hierarchy, and violence. We know from mound burials that not everyone had the same status. Some graves are elaborate, filled with shells, copper, and ornate tools. Others, more mass-like, stacked bodies, sometimes bound, sometimes missing heads. There's one burial site known as Mound 72 that really changes the tone. Archaeologists found the remains of what appears to be a high-status man, possibly a ruler, buried on a bed of more than 20,000 shell beads, arranged in the shape of a bird. Think about that 20,000 beads, placed one by one, to form wings beneath his corpse. But he wasn't alone. Around him were the remains of more than 250 others, some with signs of violent death. Some were young women laid out neatly in rows. Others were more jumbled, dumped in pits. Was this sacrifice honor mass execution? Historians still debate the meaning, the method, and the morality. But one thing's clear: whoever ruled Cahokia didn't do it gently. Still, life in the city wasn't just blood and beads. You pass what would have been a ceremonial causeway, an earthen walkway, leading from the central plaza to the mound. It's wide enough for a procession. You imagine musicians with rattles and flutes, dancers with body paint and feathers, and priests in elaborate garb, moving in rhythmic steps toward the summit. A pageant of belief, spectacle, and awe. And you're just tagging along quietly. There's something strange about this form of power. It wasn't about walls and armies. Cahokia's rulers held influence with spectacle, ritual, and symbolism. Monk's Mound didn't have a moat or a drawbridge. It had height, visibility. Everyone could see it, and everyone knew what it meant. The person on top wasn't hiding. They were watching, and they were central, literally. The entire city radiated out from this mound like spokes on a wheel. Streets, neighborhoods, and plazas aligned in symmetry. You're not just walking through dirt paths. You're inside a design. Urban planning centuries before grid cities became a thing. That planning wasn't just about convenience. It was spiritual. The mound symbolized the center of the universe, the axis mundi, the place where earth and sky connected. Rulers didn't just live on high ground, they occupied the symbolic top of a cosmic diagram, which is a lot of pressure for one guy in a fur cape. Fringe theories have taken this idea and sprinted off into wild territory. Some claim the Cahokians were interdimensional shamans. Others insist the mounds are energy conductors aligned with ley lines. A few even say the platform on Monk's Mound was used for launching souls into the cosmos, or maybe just corn husks. But here's the part that actually matters. These people understood the power of height, visibility, and ceremony. They built a city where the central figure, whoever they were, literally stood above it all. That's architecture as theology. You reach the north face of Monk's Mound now, where a series of terraces once allowed people to climb. It's not a smooth pyramid, it has layers, like steps for a god, or a ladder for spirits. You don't climb tonight. You just sit at the base, lean back, and let your eyes follow the slope up to the sky. Maybe someone is still up there watching. Or maybe the mound itself is enough. The wind picks up slightly. The grasses whisper. And the stars above those same stars that Cahokia's rulers once tracked begin to shift. They don't care who's in charge anymore. But you remember, you stretch your legs and keep moving, leaving the base of Monk's Mound behind. The city is sprawling quiet, and more alive in memory than in stone. Your path now takes you toward what might have once been Cahokia's marketplace, or at least its economic heart. Because Cahokia wasn't just a spiritual center, it was a trade hub buzzing with goods from far beyond the horizon. Imagine this. You're holding a chunk of shiny copper. Not from Illinois, this came from the Great Lakes hundreds of miles to the north. And that conch shell over there, that's from the Gulf of Mexico. Someone carried it here, likely across river systems and dense forests, past other villages and petty kingdoms. And then there's obsidian mica, marine pearls feathers, bright, brilliant, and sometimes sacred. Cahokia was the center of a trade web that stretched across half the continent. You glance down and imagine feet bare moccasined, dusty, treading these paths daily. Traders bartering in multiple languages, children tagging along, pointing at exotic trinkets, women exchanging woven mats and smoked meats, men carrying carved figurines, beads, dried fish, and ceremonial pipes. Cahokia didn't just consume goods. It radiated them, like a prehistoric Amazon fulfillment center, but with more bonfires. Historians still argue whether Cahokia actively controlled this trade or just benefited from its position along major waterways. Either way, the result was the same: people came, and they brought their best stuff. This wasn't a backwater village making do. It was a glittering node in a North American network. And it wasn't just goods moving. Ideas did too. You pass the vague outline of a building that might have been a council house or ceremonial hall. There are post holes, circular shadows in the soil that tell archaeologists where wooden beams once stood. You picture delegates from distant communities seated around a fire speaking in translation, sharing news from the forests of Wisconsin or the swamps of Florida. Cahokia absorbed everything: styles, stories, and possibly even strangers. One quirky artifact found here is a type of effigy pipe carved into the shape of humans, animals, and something in between. Some look like owls with arms. Others are grinning figures with exaggerated bellies or twisted limbs. Were they gods? Satirical figures, proto-mascots? We have no clue. But it shows Cahokia wasn't afraid to get weird with its symbolism. You smile at the thought of a market scene, a kid trying to trade a bead necklace for a carved bird, an old man tasting fermented persimmon mash and deciding it's just right, a trader from far away bartering copper for Cahokia's famed flint blades. The city wasn't isolated. It was deeply connected. It welcomed outsiders. It absorbed novelty. It evolved. And it needed to, because rapid growth requires rapid adaptation. Cahokia's population boomed in just a few generations, from a few hundred to tens of thousands. That kind of growth strains systems. Food, water, shelter, leadership. It all has to scale up. You pass by what archaeologists believe was a storage mound, built not to honor the dead, but to keep things dry and safe. Corn, maybe, or tools, or sacred items. It's hard to tell now. But what's clear is this Cahokia was organized. Someone was managing logistics. Someone knew how to move stuff and keep it secure. You crouch beside a shallow depression where a granary might have stood. Maybe it was emptied every fall, filled with maize grown from floodplain fields. Maybe a mouse chewed through one corner and caused a miniature crisis. Maybe a child was once caught sneaking a roasted cob and got scolded for weeks. Cahokia wasn't an abstract society. It was tangible, messy, and human. Here's where the scholarly debates get really juicy. Some researchers suggest that Cahokia's rise was fueled by religion, a new belief system that spread like wildfire and pulled people toward the center. Others argue it was economic, the trade, the surplus, the prestige of being in the city. Still, others point to environmental conditions, a perfect storm of rich soils and navigable rivers that made Cahokia inevitable. And then, of course, there are the fringe theories. One popular fringe idea claims Cahokia was founded by refugees from Mesoamerican collapse, that Mayan priests or Olmec architects sailed up the Mississippi and re-established their ways in secret. It's a romantic notion, and there are a few tantalizing parallels, but mainstream historians generally roll their eyes at it. There's no hard evidence, just patterns. But in the absence of writing, patterns become seductive. You keep walking and suddenly you notice something strange in the soil, tiny glittering flecks. It's not gold. It's mica, a shiny mineral used in Cahokian rituals and crafts. Some of it came from the Appalachian Mountains. That means someone carried it here, and not just once, but again and again. Trade wasn't just economics. It was sacred. These materials were chosen for their shine, their origin, their spirit. You look around. The modern world feels far away. No traffic, no Wi-Fi, just you, some glittering dirt, and the memory of a city that pulled the continent inward like a magnet. Cahokia didn't just build big, it built wide, culturally, spiritually, socially, and even as it rose, it reshaped the regions around it. Small villages changed their pottery styles to match Cahokia. Distant communities began constructing mounds of their own. Like a ripple spreading through still water, Cahokia left its mark far beyond its borders, and you're standing in the middle of the splash zone. You continue through the dark, silent grounds of what was once a roaring metropolis, your feet brushing against tufts of grass and damp earth. The air hangs heavier here, not with fog or mist, but with the weight of transformation. You've already seen Cahokia's massive mounds, its sacred woodhenge, its sprawling neighborhoods, and traces of ancient trade. But now, you're walking into something stranger the moment the city exploded. Not literally, of course. No mushroom clouds or dramatic collapses. But still, what happened here in just a few decades remains one of pre-Columbian America's greatest mysteries. Cahokia didn't just grow, it boomed. Fast, almost unnaturally fast. Imagine this. It's around the year 1050 CE. Cahokia is a sleepy village. A few houses, a small mound, some garden plots. Then, in the span of what might have been a single generation, it transforms. New neighborhoods spring up like mushrooms after a storm. Workers swarm to build the plaza. And Monk's Mound. Palisades rise. Woodhenge appears. Burials become more elaborate. The population explodes from a few hundred to over 10,000. And it keeps growing. What triggered it? Historians still argue about the cause. Some believe a religious revival spread across the region, perhaps a new prophecy, a charismatic leader, or an astronomical event interpreted as divine. Others suggest political upheaval, local leaders consolidating power and pulling people into the new capital. Still, others point to environmental bounty years of good harvests and abundant game making Cahokia the best place to settle. There's no writing, no scrolls, no neat explanation, just layers in the earth showing sudden massive change. You kneel near the remnants of a ditch, once part of a defensive wall, now just a gentle groove. Archaeologists found that the original wall around Cahokia's central area was built torn down and rebuilt multiple times. That's labor-intensive. You don't do that unless something big is going on. Possibly social unrest, possibly a cultural reset, possibly just aesthetics. Even ancient cities had renovations. One curious clue. The timing of the boom seems to line up with the appearance of a new type of pottery thinner, more decorated, more standardized. Was this the result of new people arriving? A stylistic shift, pushed by elite tastes, a signal of a more connected economy. You may be chuckling pottery, really. But archaeologists basically treat broken pots the way detectives treat fingerprints. They track patterns, find timelines, and piece together entire social revolutions from a few shards and a stubborn coffee ring. And what a revolution it was. The new Cahokia wasn't just bigger, it was reoriented. The city layout shifted to emphasize the central plaza and Monk's Mound. Buildings were realigned. The city's symbolic heart moved. It's like ancient urban planning by committee, except the result actually worked. Picture it, thousands of people working together, families migrating in from distant communities, new housing built on platforms to avoid floods, large-scale food production suddenly coordinated by someone or something with serious influence. Maybe a council of elders, maybe a priest king, maybe a really persuasive guy with a stick and a loud voice. At the same time, there's an artistic bloom. Iconography images of birds, snakes, warriors, and the Birdman motif starts appearing in objects found at Cahokia and in far-off villages. It's like a cultural brand spreading across the region. Birdman art here, Birdman pipes there, Birdman everything. You're witnessing the birth of a symbolic language. And yet, this massive growth wasn't without its cost. You arrive at what was once a residential district, now a field with barely a bump to show for it. Archaeological digs in areas like this have revealed subtle signs of struggle, a sudden increase in long bone injuries consistent with labor stress, narrower house spacing suggesting crowding, even evidence of declining dental health. People were working harder, living closer, and maybe not eating as well as they had before. Was Cahokia a promised land, or a pressure cooker? Historians still debate whether the city's rapid expansion was voluntary or coerced. Did people come because they wanted to, or because they had no choice? Some suggest regional droughts or warfare elsewhere pushed migrants toward Cahokia's protection and resources. Others think the city's leaders actively recruited them, offering food security's spiritual meaning. Either way, it worked. For a while. You crouch near a small mound, one of the lesser ones. Maybe a residence for a middle-tier leader. Maybe a shrine. No treasures were found here, but the mound itself is a symbol of social complexity. Not everyone lived in simple huts. Not everyone was equal. And here's the weird part. Even as Cahokia's population surged, there's surprisingly little sign of major warfare. No mass graves full of battle wounds. No burned-out neighborhoods. It seems the city expanded rapidly, without the kind of violent conflict seen in other ancient metropolises. That doesn't mean it was peaceful, just controlled. You pause at a spot where the soil is darker, a midden layer, rich with charcoal and ash. This was a trash dump, a big one. Bits of bone, burnt corn, broken tools, what looks like a chewed piece of deer antler. It's mundane, and yet it tells you so much. A society that eats together, burns together, and buries its leftovers together is deeply connected. One quirky find from middens like these fossilized feces. Yep, ancient poop. And scientists analyze it. For diet parasites, even pollen. One sample showed traces of nuts, fish, and maize, and a frankly worrying number of intestinal worms. City life, it's never glamorous. You rise, brushing your hands on your thighs. Around you, Cahokia feels bigger now. You felt its bones, its breath, and its boom. It wasn't a gentle evolution, it was a leap. A surge of human will, shaped into wood, clay, and earth. And as you move forward deeper into the city, you can't help but wonder, what happens when a city builds itself too fast? You follow a narrow footpath, at least that's what it feels like, even if it's long been overtaken by weeds and time. On either side, the air seems tighter, like you've entered a space once enclosed. And you have. You're walking into the core of Cahokia's sacred precinct, a zone that was at one point surrounded by walls. Big ones. Spiked wooden palisades encircled this area, stretching for nearly 2 miles in a giant square. 4 massive gates. Dozens of guard towers, and evidence that the whole thing was built, dismantled and rebuilt 4 separate times. You raise an eyebrow. 4 rebuilds. That's not just maintenance. That's ritual. Or paranoia. Or both. Historians still argue whether the walls were meant to defend against external enemies, or to enforce internal divisions, keeping sacred space pure, or perhaps keeping an elite class protected from the masses. There are even debates about whether the wall itself was the ritual, each rebuilding a statement of renewal or cosmic reset. Whatever the reason, it sends a clear message. Something important, maybe dangerous, was happening inside those walls. You cross the invisible threshold into what was once the inner sanctum. Here, surrounded by mounds, temples, and plazas, the city's most powerful events played out. Religious ceremonies, political decrees, maybe even human sacrifice. This is Cahokia's stage, and you're standing right on it. And speaking of sacrifice, let's not tiptoe around it. Archaeologists have found strong evidence of ritual killings here. In Mound 72, for example, the remains of dozens of young women were buried together in orderly rows. Some were laid out with care. Others appear to have been hastily tossed into pits. Their bones bear few signs of violence, but the context is chilling. These weren't simple burials. They were performances of power. And near those rows, the remains of a central male figure, buried on a bed of beads. It's always that guy, right? You wonder what he was like. A revered priest, a brutal ruler, the founder of a dynasty. Whoever he was, someone or many someones wanted him to be remembered with grandeur. The women buried near him may have been wives, or captives, or temple attendants. No one knows. But their presence is part of the story, and it's not a gentle one. You continue walking, and your foot bumps something. Just a stone, probably. But you can't help imagining it's a piece of broken offering. A tool. An effigy. Some fragment of a life once lived inside the walls. Here's a quirky detail: some of the mounds were covered in red ochre, a natural pigment used in rituals across the ancient world. It's like Cahokia was painting the earth itself. A splash of symbolic blood, an offering, a mark. You find that chilling and beautiful in equal measure. Not everything here was violent, though. Ceremonies could be celebratory dances, marriages, harvest feasts. This was a place of birth as much as death. Drums echoing across the plaza, smoke rising in spirals, fires casting flickering shadows on painted faces, maybe even laughter, maybe joy. But still there's a tension here. You feel it in your shoulders, in your breath. This was a space for transformation. People entered it to be changed. Whether by ritual, by decree, or by fire, you didn't come out the same. You arrive at what may have been a temple site. Nothing remains but traces in the dirt and the records of archaeologists who saw post holes forming a large rectangle. Some think it was a longhouse of worship. Others say a council house. Maybe both. The line between politics and religion was thin here, if it existed at all. Fringe theorists love to point out that the mound and plaza layout mirrors other ancient sacred cities from Teotihuacan to Angkor Wat. Surely, they whisper, this must mean contact between cultures. But the more grounded explanation is simply this: humans, like patterns, we find meaning in symmetry. And when we want to impress the gods, we tend to build big, centered, and tall. You lean against an old interpretive sign, its words worn by sun and time. There's a drawing of what this area might have looked like: crowds in the plaza, banners flapping fires, burning a priest atop the mound, raising their hands to the sky. It's dramatic, a little theatrical, but probably not that far off. Cahokia thrived on spectacle, the kind of shared ritual that binds people across class, language, and tribe. You weren't just watching the ceremony, you were part of it, one of thousands in a living theater of dirt breath and belief. And you didn't have to understand the whole thing to feel its weight. You step away from the drawing and look out over the open space. It's quiet now, but back then, it would have been thunderous. Heartbeat drums, song, movement, maybe even the sound of ritual weeping. This wasn't just a place to observe, it was a place to surrender. And so you do. Just for a moment, you close your eyes and breathe deep. The air smells faintly of damp earth and cut grass. But if you really try, you can catch a trace of cedar smoke, the soft rustle of feathers, a footstep behind you that isn't there. You open your eyes. Nothing, just grass. But the memory lingers. You walk on. You veer away from the plaza, now drawn by something quieter, something darker. The ceremonial grandeur behind you fades into the shadows of smaller mounds and flatter fields, less symmetrical, less theatrical. These are not places of rule or ritual spectacle. These are places of memory, of endings. Ahead lies a section of the site where archaeologists uncovered evidence of something much more grim than prayers and feasts. You tread lightly now, not because the earth will give way beneath you, but because what it holds is heavy. This is where they found the mass graves. One of the most unsettling discoveries in Cahokia came not in its palaces or its platforms, but in pits dug into the earth filled with bodies, some carefully arranged, others jumbled like forgotten cargo. There's no inscription, no gravestone, no grand narrative, just bones and silence. You approach the area once called Mound 72 Yes again, because this isn't just a one-note story. It's layered like the mound itself. Below the mound, archaeologists found multiple burial pits. Some held high-status individuals decked in beads and exotic materials. But others were filled with people buried in ways that scream ceremony or tragedy. One pit had the remains of over 50 women buried in parallel rows neatly aligned. Another had several men, their skulls fractured, their hands missing. Executed, sacrificed, defeated enemies. Servants meant to follow someone into the afterlife. Historians still argue about the meaning. Some frame it as honor, others horror. The women might have been chosen participants or victims of a powerful elite asserting dominance even in death. And those dismembered men no one knows. Could be rebellion crushed. Could be outsiders punished. Could be something entirely different. You stand there feeling the grass underfoot, wondering what you'd see if time reversed. Lines of solemn figures walking to a burial site, songs rising into the dusk. Or perhaps resistance, struggle, weeping, maybe both. a quirky discovery. In one grave, archaeologists found a bundle of arrows tied together still intact after nearly 1,000 years. Were they symbolic a mark of the buried's identity, or simply grave goods for the next life's hunt? It's poetic, isn't it? Even in death, they thought about what came next. You wander beyond Mound 72 and reach another cluster of post holes too small for houses, too clustered for ceremonial platforms. Some experts believe these were charnel houses, temporary structures, where the dead were laid out before final burial. In other words, this was where bodies decomposed sometimes for weeks or months, as part of sacred preparation. Imagine that for a moment. Walking past a wooden house, where death lived openly, where the air thickened with the scent of decay, where you might leave offerings or prayers beside a relative's fading form. Life and death didn't occupy different zip codes in Cahokia. They shared the same dirt, and it wasn't always so structured. Some pits, especially those found far from the central ceremonial mounds, held remains that looked hastily buried limbs, tangled bones, broken grave goods missing or sparse. Were these plague victims? Criminals? The forgotten poor? Maybe people who didn't belong in the sacred order of things. This is where Cahokia's mystery deepens. For all its grandeur, Cahokia had a dark underlayer literally and figuratively. It celebrated life, yes, but it also buried people in ways that defy easy storytelling. Egalitarian utopia? Hardly. The city's organization suggests clear social tiers, elaborate burials for some, silent, shallow graves for others. Historians still debate whether these burial practices reflected a deep cosmology, a belief in layered worlds, spirits, and transitions, or something more pragmatic. Was it religion or politics, dressed up in feathers and fire? And yet even in this sorrowful terrain there's beauty. In one burial, archaeologists found a body placed with a carved figurine, an object that seemed to represent a spiritual guide. The figure had outstretched arms and wings, a bird-person hybrid, a messenger, a protector, or just a really fancied toy for the journey beyond. You smile faintly. Even death needs a chaperone. You walk a little further and pause at the edge of a gentle hillock that was once a mound. There's no marker here, no plaque. But somewhere beneath your feet, people are still resting. People who built the city, or served in its temples, or lived simple lives and died with no ceremony at all, and the earth holds them. Cahokia's story isn't just grandeur and trade routes. It's also the quiet, unrecorded end of lives. The decisions of who was buried where, with what, and by whom. You realize something profound. This city was obsessed with memory. Its leaders built mounds to be remembered. Its priests performed rituals to bind the past and future. Its people buried their dead with objects with care, with a hope that someone someday would notice. And you just did. The sky feels closer now, the stars low and watching. The grass sways gently as if moved by more than wind. You stand quietly and whisper a thank you to the dead. You'll never know, to the lives you'll never fully understand, and to the silence that somehow speaks louder than stone. Then you walk on one step at a time. You leave the burial fields behind, the hum of memory fading with each step. The path is uneven now, as if even the earth hesitates to tell the next part of the story. But you go anyway, because you have to. Because this is where Cahokia begins to vanish. One moment, it's North America's largest city. The next, just earthworks, whispers, and questions. You try to imagine it, thousands of people gone. The plazas empty. the mounds left without ceremony, a silence settling in not overnight, but year by year, like dust on forgotten shelves. By 1350 CE, the lights of Cahokia flicker out. The people are gone, not moved, not conquered, just gone. Historians still argue why. There are theories, of course, plenty. Too many, maybe. Environmental collapse, political unrest, overpopulation, resource depletion, disease, drought, floods. Maybe all of them, maybe none. What we do know is that Cahokia rose fast and disappeared just as quickly. You pause beside the trace of an old palisade trench. It's filled with dark soil, now barely visible to the untrained eye. Once it marked a sacred boundary. Now it's a line of grass. The bones of the city remain, but the soul that slipped away. Some scholars point to climate data. Tree rings, pollen samples, floodplain layers, all suggesting the environment turned against them. Too much rain one year, not enough the next. Crops failing, wells fouling, people watching their sacred center crack, dry out, and turn on them. Others think internal unrest played a role, a society growing too fast, stratifying too sharply, relying too much on elite control. If food ran short, if rituals stopped working, if power faltered, people would have left. Quietly, in waves. There's evidence that neighborhoods were gradually abandoned, not all at once. Longhouses left to rot, hearths gone cold, trash pits no longer filled, like a slow exhale. And what about disease? Here's the eerie part. Cahokia vanished before Europeans arrived in full force, long before the age of conquest of smallpox blankets and missionary zeal. But it's possible that indirect contact via trade brought illnesses from the coasts or from the south. A virus doesn't need a passport, it just needs a path. One theory suggests a pre-contact pandemic, a sickness that swept through trade routes like fire through dry grass. Cahokia, being a hub, would have been particularly vulnerable, densely populated, highly mobile, spiritually shaken. And when the gods fail to protect you, people stop believing, or they leave. You step into an open patch that once held houses. Now it's just clover and scattered dandelions. The silence here isn't ceremonial. It's blank. Cahokia wasn't conquered by enemies. It wasn't leveled by fire. It simply faded and left behind no written record, no farewell note, no legend passed down through centuries. Just questions. Even the people who came later. Shawnee Illiniwek Osage remembered the mounds, but not the name. Cahokia, ironically, is the name of a group that didn't build the city. The French labeled the site after them in the 1600s. It's like calling the Roman Forum the tourist center, because that's who was standing there when someone finally asked. A quirky detail. In the 19th century, treasure hunters dug into the mounds looking for gold. They found bones beads and confusion instead. At one point, a team even tried to level Monk's Mound to make it farmland. Can you imagine that? Let's just flatten this ancient wonder for corn. Welcome to modern priorities. You shake your head and keep walking. Cahokia's disappearance might have felt less like a tragedy and more like a migration. People drifting away to smaller villages, to safer ground, to places where the mounds didn't tower over them, reminding them of broken promises and buried gods. And yet, the site remained. The mounds didn't crumble. They eroded slowly, but refused to vanish. They waited patient and stoic, while empires rose and fell around them. They watched as the French built forts nearby, as Americans raised barns and steamships, as highways paved over ancient plazas, as planes flew overhead, buzzing like angry mosquitoes. Even today, Cahokia lives beneath the noise of modern life. It's a historic site, sure, but it's also beneath suburban backyards, baseball diamonds, strip malls. An interstate highway plows straight through the north edge of the ancient city, the ghosts of its boulevards replaced by car horns and billboards for fast food. But if you listen closely, it's still here. A patch of ground that doesn't quite level. A pattern of post holes under a parking lot. A child's toy unearthed in a backyard that turns out to be ancient flint. Cahokia is not dead. It's sleeping. And tonight, you walked right into its dream. You leave the empty field where Cahokia's people once gathered, where ceremonies flickered, and crops failed and drift slowly into the aftermath, into the silence that settled after the last footprints faded. But now, you're not just following the past, you're shadowing those who came later. Because the next chapter of Cahokia isn't written by priests or rulers. It's written by people who missed everything. Enter the Europeans. Imagine it. It's the 1500s, maybe early 1600s. Spanish conquistadors are cutting through the swamps of the southeast. French trappers are paddling canoes down the Mississippi. The English are too busy starving in Jamestown to worry about what lies farther west. And all around them signs of something they don't understand. They stumble upon massive earth mounds, raised platforms with no buildings, conical burial hills, alignments of posts. The dirt is packed too perfectly to be natural, but the people they meet local tribes shrug or offer only vague memories. The great city is gone, and the story is already lost. The Europeans miss it all. They see the bones, but not the body. They map the river, but ignore the ruins. They ask who built these, and when no one gives a satisfactory answer, they assume certainly not the people here. Because clearly, to their colonial minds, Native Americans couldn't possibly have built a city bigger than London. Historians still shake their heads at the way Cahokia was overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. Even as settlers built farms atop the mounds, they called them Indian graves or natural hills or curiosities. One newspaper in the 1800s proposed that the mounds had been left by Welsh explorers. Another suggested Egyptians. A few people, brace yourself, blamed the Vikings. Yes, apparently Vikings took a wrong turn at Greenland and stopped by Illinois to build pyramids out of dirt. You'd laugh if it weren't so telling. You wander through the imagined scene, a French Jesuit priest in the 1700s, standing atop Monk's Mound, squinting into the prairie sun, muttering a prayer over what he thinks is a burial hill. A Spanish soldier riding past a conical mound without stopping. An American pioneer cutting into a slope to build a cellar, finding bones and tossing them aside. The city was right there, and they didn't see it. You sigh, because this isn't just a failure of vision, it's a failure of imagination. The idea that a Native American civilization could be this complex, this grand, this urban, was incompatible with colonial expectations. If it didn't match the myths of noble savages or wandering tribes, it was dismissed as impossible. One quirky example. In the 19th century, amateur historians started collecting mound artifacts and showing them off in cabinets of curiosity. Arrowheads, beads, pipes, all without context. They were trophies, not stories, pieces ripped from the book without reading the page. Meanwhile, the mounds eroded. Farmers plowed over them. Builders flattened them. One by one, Cahokia's bones were scattered. By the late 1800s, Monk's Mound was all that remained intact, and even that was threatened. A railroad company actually proposed building a tunnel through it, as in right through the middle, because nothing says progress like dynamiting a sacred pyramid for coal transport. Thankfully, someone said no. Cahokia was designated a state historic site in the 1920s. Later, it earned recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is basically history's way of saying, oops, our bad. This actually mattered. You find a bench. Yes, there's a real one now, and sit. In front of you, a low, sloping field. To anyone else, it's just grass. But you see the outline of a neighborhood. You know people once laughed here, argued, dreamed, and disappeared. And here's where the real tragedy lies, not just in what was forgotten, but in who forgot. For generations, America's history books erased Cahokia. Public school maps skipped over it. When kids learned about ancient cities, they learned about Athens, Rome, Beijing, Cairo, not Cahokia. Not the city that had a population larger than Paris. Not the place where Native Americans built solar calendars and city grids. Historians still debate why it took so long for Cahokia to enter mainstream awareness. Was it racism, arrogance, discomfort with the complexity of indigenous history? Probably all three. But here's the hopeful twist today. Things are changing. New research is happening. Tribes are reclaiming the story, and people like you are walking these fields learning that history isn't just castles and empires. It's mounds. It's corn. It's dirt packed with ceremony and struggle. Cahokia isn't just about what was. It's about what could have been remembered. You rise from the bench, your footsteps soft on the earth. Somewhere behind you, the stars still shine over Monk's Mound. And for the first time in centuries, someone is really looking. That someone is you. You head west now, where Cahokia's borders once frayed into smaller satellite communities. Suburbs, if you like, though, with fewer coffee shops and considerably more squash. The central mounds are behind you, but the story's not done. Not by a long shot. Because this is the part where America itself tries to pretend Cahokia never existed. You wander through what today is an odd mix of residential neighborhoods, industrial zones, and grassy patches interrupted by telephone poles. Somewhere beneath this cluttered patchwork lies one of the greatest cities in North American history. But if you hadn't read the sign, you'd never guess it was here. It's as if a whole civilization was swept under a rug, then someone put a strip mall on top of it. For much of modern history, Cahokia was treated like an inconvenience. Farmers plowed it flat, developers ignored it, and scholars. For decades, they dismissed the mounds as too primitive to be worth serious attention. After all, these weren't made of stone. There were no golden crowns, no marble columns, just dirt. Beautiful, deliberate, sacred dirt, but dirt nonetheless. You pause at the edge of a fenced-off area. A modern home nearby has a backyard that literally borders a lesser mound. There's a garden gnome standing watch over it. You blink. The absurdity is almost poetic. It wasn't malice that buried Cahokia. It was indifference. A quiet shrug that turned pyramids into landscaping, one quirky tale. In the 1950s, part of a mound was bulldozed to make room for a drive-in theater. Families parked their Chevys on ancient, sacred soil to eat popcorn and watch sci-fi movies. Maybe a flick about aliens building pyramids. Oh, the irony. And here's the most surreal part when that drive-in closed decades later. The mound it covered began to rise again. Grass grew. The earth swelled slightly, as if Cahokia was reclaiming itself 1 inch at a time. You love that. History refusing to stay buried. But how did a place so vast, so central, get erased so thoroughly? Historians still argue over the cultural blind spots that allowed it. Some say early archaeologists were too focused on Europe and the Middle East. Others blame 19th century narratives that cast Native Americans as nomadic, unsophisticated, and incapable of large-scale projects. Those stories were useful, especially when settlers wanted to justify taking land, after all who could claim sovereignty over a field of forgotten mounds. But Cahokia always lingered. Its bones didn't go anywhere. Monk's Mound remained too big to ignore, and every so often a plow would strike something strange, a pot, a burial, a pattern in the earth. The story clawed its way back through layers of sod and denial. In the 20th century, a slow shift began. Archaeologists took the site seriously. Excavations uncovered massive plazas, intricate burials, and city-scale planning. And then came the aerial photography, the moment where you could see the layout from above. Streets, neighborhoods, mounds in geometric relation. Cahokia wasn't a collection of bumps in a field. It was a city. You look up now and imagine that view, a bird's-eye perspective of a civilization reborn in negative space. Streets like veins, plazas like organs, the mounds still beating however faintly. Even today, though Cahokia remains underappreciated, its visitors center gets a fraction of the traffic of places like Gettysburg or Mount Vernon. Its story is taught in some schools, but rarely with the weight it deserves. And yet, things are changing. Tribal historians, indigenous scholars, and younger archaeologists are breathing new life into Cahokia's legacy. It's not just about dead people in the dirt. It's about what they built, what they believed, what they left for us to uncover. You stroll past a signpost along the modern trail. It's laminated, sun-faded, probably overlooked by most. But you pause. It says simply, "You are standing on the memory of a city." That hits you in the chest. Because it's true. Beneath your feet is more than grass. It's civic planning. It's spiritual devotion. It's laughter, suffering, dance, fire, trade, love, death, and rebirth. And it's ours. Not in the possessive sense, but in the human sense. We inherit this place whether we understand it or not. The tragedy isn't that Cahokia disappeared. It's that for so long no one asked where it went. You step away from the sign and keep walking, not toward anything specific, just following the shape of a story that refuses to stay silent. You pass another mound barely visible beneath weeds. You glance at a mailbox. A child's tricycle leans against it. Life moves on, but Cahokia is still here. Not erased, just waiting. You're walking again, slower now, careful. Not because the ground is rough, but because you're walking through a story that's being rewritten in real time. After centuries of silence, Cahokia is starting to talk again, and the people digging in the mud are finally listening. Archaeologists, scientists, historians, students in cargo pants and muddy boots with clipboards and little brushes. They're the ones resurrecting Cahokia one layer at a time. You picture a dig site roped off knee-deep trowels in motion, the hum of cautious excitement in the air. Someone crouches, squinting at a sliver of broken pottery. Someone else is dusting a bone. Someone has just found a post hole perfectly round, and they're losing their mind over it. Yes, a post hole. Basically a dirt circle where a wooden pole once stood. Doesn't sound sexy, but to a Cahokia researcher it's everything. It says here. Something stood here. Someone built something. Someone lived. That's what modern science does. It listens to the dirt. You kneel at an imagined trench. Below the topsoil is a band of darker earth, organic rich, filled with charcoal and debris. A living layer. Someone cooked here. Someone spilled something. Someone buried a tool they didn't mean to lose. And the earth kept it all. One of the most groundbreaking discoveries in recent years, corn pollen. Yep, microscopic grains trapped in soil samples. They help date farming activity, track seasonal use, and prove that Cahokia wasn't just a ceremonial center. It was a place where thousands of people ate cooked and farmed. The food here was real, tangible, crunchy, probably sticky too. Nearby, another team uncovers a cache of ritual objects, beads, figurines, chunks of red ochre. They're arranged, deliberately placed, not dropped. Offerings, maybe. Tokens of a ceremony. A bargain with the gods. One quirky artifact, pulled from the earth. A finely carved stone figurine of a woman, bent slightly, holding her stomach. Some call her the birthing figure. Others say she's symbolic of corn or the earth itself. Either way, she's been resting underground for 1,000 years, waiting for someone to notice. And here's where things get even more intriguing. With advances in technology, archaeologists now use remote sensing tools, magnetometers, ground-penetrating radar drones with LiDAR. These let them see below the surface without digging, like X-rays for landscapes. The results, mind-blowing. Turns out Cahokia is even bigger than we thought. Buried roads, forgotten mounds, outlying neighborhoods, all still there just beneath the grass. It's like the ghost of the city is lying flat face down, waiting to be turned over and studied. Historians still debate the full scope of Cahokia's influence. Did its culture ripple out for hundreds of miles? Did it spark a mound-building renaissance across the Midwest and Southeast? Was it the capital of a true political entity, or just a temporary religious explosion? There are no easy answers, but every dig adds a puzzle piece. Every dirt layer, every pollen grain, every buried footprint builds the picture. You step into the modern interpretive center just in your mind for now. Inside are maps, replicas, models, a miniature version of Monk's Mound, a 3D rendering of what the plaza once looked like, murals showing people planting building dancing. One wall features photos of excavation sites, mud-streaked faces smiling next to post molds. Others show artifacts, copper-covered ornaments, effigy pots, shaped like animals' bones carved into tools. And behind all this, there's a whiteboard, filled with question marks. Because for every answer Cahokia gives it, offers two more mysteries. You step outside again, standing under the open sky. Somewhere nearby, a new team is beginning a dig. They've staked out their square. The trowels are ready. The students are excited. Someone's brought snacks. There's optimism in the air. You love that. Because Cahokia isn't just a relic. It's an active conversation. Between past and present. Between silence and sound. Between what we assume and what we learn to see. And here's something most people don't realize. You don't have to be an archaeologist to uncover Cahokia. Sometimes all it takes is walking here, reading, listening, being open. Every curious thought, every whispered what happened here, adds energy to the story. You walk a little further and look down. There's nothing visibly remarkable here, just grass, but you smile anyway, because you know what's beneath it. A world waiting. You wander off the main trails, now drifting toward the edges of Cahokia's ancient footprint. Out here the land rolls gently peppered with trees, drainage ditches, and more surprisingly suburban homes. Sprinklers click. Dogs bark. Somewhere in the distance a radio is playing something faintly country. Cahokia isn't a city anymore, but it's also not just ruins. It's beneath things. Underfoot. hiding in plain sight. You cross a stretch of land that archaeologists call the outer precincts. Sounds fancy, but you're pretty sure you just stepped over someone's sprinkler hose. Yet under this lawn, or perhaps under the road nearby, there may be post-holes graves, or the faint trace of a vanished mound. People mow their yards here, toss frisbees, grill hot dogs. They live their lives right on top of ancient ones. That's the eerie beauty of Cahokia. It didn't end with a bang. It wasn't buried in lava or swallowed by the sea. It just blurred. And over the centuries, cities blurred back over it. Historians still debate how much of modern Collinsville, Illinois, and surrounding towns sit atop the original Cahokia site. But everyone agrees, this isn't a single archaeological location. It's a living palimpsest. Layers of time. Stacked, overlapping, messy. In some places, mounds were leveled completely, bulldozed for subdivisions. In others, bits of the past emerge unexpectedly. Someone plants a tree, hits a stone tool. A crew digs a foundation, unearths bone fragments. Construction halts. Science steps in. History breathes. You stand now near what used to be a ridge of minor mounds, long since scraped down. There's a Little League field here. Bleachers. Trash bins. The smell of popcorn and sunscreen. Kids shout oblivious that they're running bases over ancient ceremonial grounds. It's jarring and kind of perfect. Because Cahokia isn't frozen in a museum case. It's beneath your cleats. One quirky discovery. In the 1980s, during construction of a subdivision, workers uncovered a burial cluster. Men, women, and children laid to rest, with shell beads and ceramic vessels. The site was respectfully studied, documented, and preserved. The neighborhood still built. Somewhere, a family has a kitchen that sits directly above a 1,000-year-old resting place. There's something both unsettling and intimate about that. And yet that's the reality of so much ancient history. We don't always move around it. We move on top of it. Even Cahokia's sacred core isn't immune. A 4-lane road now slices past Monk's Mound. There are fast food restaurants within walking distance of Woodhenge. You could get a cheeseburger and a soda, then go stand where high priests once measured the stars. You laugh softly. If the Birdman figure could see what's become of his cosmic capital, would he be furious? Amused. Just confused by ketchup. And then maybe you wonder, is this so different from how it's always been? Cahokia itself was built atop older villages. The mound builders weren't the first. They were the ones who reorganized the land, repurposed old structures, buried their sacred with new meaning. Even in their time, they were living on top of someone else's past. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate, if Cahokia's founders knew they were reclaiming holy ground, or if it was coincidence. But the echoes are uncanny. A mound becomes a temple, becomes a field, becomes a highway. You walk past a modest backyard garden, blooming with sunflowers and tomatoes. Someone's plastic pink flamingo guards the fence. Unseen below the surface, maybe charcoal from an ancient hearth, a chipped flint blade, or an infant burial cradled in clay, and you feel it again, the quiet hum beneath the world. This place hasn't stopped speaking. We've just forgotten how to listen. You turn back toward the city center, Monk's Mound rising in the distance. Even from here, its green shape cuts the horizon. A reminder, a monument, a bruise on time's skin. You pause beside a drainage ditch. It's ugly, functional. But as you crouch, you notice the soil layers, dark bands, streaks of clay, tiny fragments of stone. The ditch accidentally reveals a cross-section of centuries, like a slice of cake you weren't meant to eat. Someone's irrigation channel, and yet also a timeline. You run your fingers along one of the darker bands. It crumbles slightly. Just dirt. But you wonder whose footsteps compacted it, whose breath soaked it, whose bones once lay nearby. It's almost funny. The greatest city in ancient North America isn't a walled monument anymore. It's a whisper underneath suburbia. It's hiding under aluminum siding and rusted mailboxes. It's poking out between gas stations and cul-de-sacs. And still, it endures. You walk back slowly, letting the rhythm of the neighborhood fold over you. Lawn sprinklers hiss. Porch lights blink on. Somewhere a dog barks. And beneath it all, Cahokia waits. Not lost. Just quieter now. You're nearing the end of Cahokia now, not just in your steps, but in your understanding. The mounds lie behind you, half lost in shadow, half held in memory. The quiet has settled into your bones, and the strange weight of 1,000 years hums beneath your feet. You've walked through ritual and wrought ceremony, and silence, mud, and starlight. But before you go, there's one more corner to turn, one more weird, wonderful chapter. Because you've heard the rumors, haven't you? The whispers that float on internet forums and late-night YouTube rabbit holes. The same ones that pop up whenever ancient ruins and pyramids get involved. You smirk before you even say it aloud. Did aliens build Cahokia? Yes, that's actually a theory. You pause at a rise in the earth, once a minor mound, now just a lump overlooking a small creek. The sky above is thick with stars, and you know someone out there believes this was a landing site. That the symmetry, the mounds, the celestial alignments, they're too precise, too advanced. Surely extraterrestrials were involved. Historians, and frankly anyone with a shovel roll their eyes at this. Because the truth is, Cahokia doesn't need aliens. What happened here is already extraordinary. Dirt moved by hand, calendars built from trees, cities planned with star charts and corn maps, no anti-gravity, no UFOs, just people. Brilliant, messy, driven people. And sometimes that's even harder to believe. Because if humans did this without wheels, without metal tools, without pack animals, what else are we capable of? Here's a fringe. But real theory that's far more grounded and fascinating. Cahokia may have collapsed under the weight of its own biology. Yes, really. Some researchers believe that the city's boom triggered an environmental shift, deforestation erosion, human waste runoff that affected water quality and crop yields. In other words, Cahokia may have been taken down by poop. Let that sink in. Tens of thousands of people living shoulder to shoulder, with no plumbing tossing waste into pits or streams. Eventually, pathogens win, especially in a city built on a floodplain. If the river turned bad, so did everything else. And that's not just funny. It's poetic. It's tragic. It's human. Cahokia didn't fall to conquest. It wasn't burned. It wasn't swallowed by fire or flood. It was eroded by daily life, by too many feet, too many mouths, too many rituals and not enough forests. Its death was slow, silent, and in some ways, inevitable. Historians still debate the tipping point. Was it drought? Was it descent? Was it a priest who got it wrong one too many times? No one agrees. No one knows. And maybe that's the most honest ending of all. Because Cahokia wasn't a myth. It was a city. And like all cities, it was made of stories, not absolutes. You climb a final small rise, maybe an unexcavated mound, maybe just a natural bump, and sit. You can see Monk's Mound in the distance, the skyline broken only by trees, and the occasional cell tower. The stars pulse overhead, and here comes the wind down. It's late now. You've walked far. Your mind hums with images of buried plazas, sky-aligned timber rings, and dirt mounds that once touched the stars. You feel it all quieting, like a book slowly closing its final pages, soft, delicate, and oddly warm. The breeze slows. The air turns thick, almost padded like cotton on your skin. Beneath your feet is the ghost of a city, and beneath that the bones of those who built it. Not gods, not aliens, just people like you, tired sometimes, hopeful sometimes, brilliant without knowing it. They stood where you stand. They looked at the same moon. They built something enormous with nothing but baskets and belief. Let that thought settle in your chest, like a smooth stone dropped into a calm pond. Because now it's time to rest. Let the story fade. Let the soil cover the noise. Let the quiet rise like fog across the mound tops. And when you dream tonight, maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself walking those streets again. But this time, the plaza is full. The fires are lit. The songs are louder. And Cahokia lives once more. Good night.